They call it Camp Century. At this new site, the US will carry out tests on people and material needed in the deployment of nuclear missiles. A human settlement nearly 100 feet below the surface of the ice has never been attempted.
In 1959, under the guise of scientific cooperation, the United States created Camp Century, an underground city that drew worldwide admiration. But hidden behind the glamorous images of comfortable life underground was a trap so sophisticated it was almost perfect. When the American military withdrew, they did not return the land to its integrity. On the contrary, it marked the beginning of a perpetual occupation. They left behind something that, while still legally part of Denmark, effectively shackled the power of Washington. What lies dormant beneath the ice, holding an entire island hostage to this day? The answer is far worse than you might imagine. A miracle in the ice. In 1959, the United States constructed a fully equipped underground city deep within the frozen heart of the Greenland ice cap, known as Camp Century. The project was launched as a marvel of modern engineering. It was not merely a research station, but a complete subterranean settlement operating at a depth of 30 meters beneath the snow surface. Outside, ambient temperatures remained steady at -30 degrees Celsius. Yet, inside, daily life was as warm and comfortable as in any small town in America. The creation of this city began with a logistical effort without precedent. Massive supply convoys called heavy swings crawled across the frozen wasteland at a speed of 2 miles per hour, transporting thousands of tons of materials through the ice desert. Military engineers deployed powerful snow-cutting machines imported from Switzerland, originally designed to clear alpine mountain passes, to carve 23 enormous trenches directly into the glacier. These trenches were reinforced with load-bearing metal arches and then buried again beneath densely compacted snow, forming a perfectly concealed roof system. Beneath this hidden shell, prefabricated living quarters were assembled on wooden foundations, providing housing for nearly 200 soldiers and specialists. The facilities included hot water, electrical power, a cinema, and even a chapel. The life-sustaining core of this artificial ecosystem was PM-2A, a portable nuclear reactor designed to deliver sustained energy without the frequent refueling required by conventional diesel generators. Its presence allowed Camp Century to operate independently and continuously, transforming the site into a glowing symbol of Western technological power. Color documentary footage released by the military depicted soldiers living comfortably, enjoying lavish Christmas celebrations, and working in clean and modern surroundings. The most vivid witness to this seemingly flawless picture was Søren Gregersen, an 18-year-old Danish scout invited to visit the camp and document his experience. For Gregersen, and for the public of that era, Camp Century appeared as a triumph of human will over nature, a transparent scientific stepping stone toward future settlement on the moon. Yet this vision of comfort and sustainability stood in direct contradiction to the physical reality of its foundation. The city was built inside a glacier that never stands still, but constantly creeps toward the ocean. This geological truth rendered the construction of a permanent nuclear infrastructure technically irrational from any civil engineering perspective. Numbers that do not lie. Typically, scientific research stations in polar regions are designed to be minimal, prioritizing flexibility and low operational costs to support small teams of climate or geological observers. Camp Century stood in stark contrast. The scale of its infrastructure and the resources poured into it revealed a severe imbalance when compared with its stated mission of ice core research. As early as 1946, the United States had proposed purchasing the entire island of Greenland from Denmark for $100 million in gold. This diplomatic move made clear that the land was valued for its military strategic position rather than its scientific potential. When the offer was rejected, Camp Century emerged alongside the construction of Thule Air Base nearby, a massive operation involving up to 12,000 personnel and fleets of heavy transport vessels to establish a vast logistical bridgehead. The historical context of the project was inseparable from the intense geopolitical power struggle that followed the Soviet Union's successful launch of Sputnik in 1957 and the first human spaceflight by Yuri Gagarin in 1961. The pressure of the so-called missile gap, the fear that the Soviet Union had achieved superiority in long-range strike capability, forced the United States to seek deterrence solutions beyond conventional frameworks. Within this context, deploying a nuclear reactor and constructing reinforced tunnel systems beneath the ice at Camp Century consumed budgets and engineering capacity far exceeding the needs of supplying electricity to 200 people. Technical specifications of the excavated trenches reveal dimensions and load-bearing capacities far greater than required for housing prefabricated living modules. The irrationality deepens when geological factors are considered. The architects of the project were fully aware that the Greenland ice cap is a dynamic entity, constantly deforming and drifting. Embedding a nuclear reactor and rigid metal structures within a continuously moving and plastic environment violates fundamental principles of construction safety. Such a decision can only be explained if the technical risks were deemed acceptable in service of another objective, one more urgent and short-term than long-term scientific research. The existence of vast empty spaces, combined with strict security measures that restricted free access even for internal personnel, suggests that the underground city was designed to accommodate objects far larger and heavier than meteorological instruments. Camp Century does not resemble a laboratory complex. Instead, its structure mirrors that of an underground industrial transport system, one capable of moving heavy vehicles beyond the sight of the outside world. The trails of the Iceworm. On the surface of publicly released reports, Camp Century appears as a static collection of laboratories and residential areas, where scientists quietly analyzed ice core samples to decode climate history in a standard polar research station. Movement is typically limited to narrow pedestrian corridors or small sleds used to transport light samples between sections. However, when the layer of official messaging is stripped away by unpublished photographs and detailed engineering drawings, an entirely different operational structure comes into view, shattering the notion of a purely scientific facility. Beneath the Greenland ice lay not a stationary research station, but a vast underground railway network built on an industrial scale, designed for the continuous movement of heavy machinery. The strongest evidence for this reality resides in the photographic records captured by witness Soren Gregerson, alongside technical schematics produced by the United States Army. These materials document the presence of tunnels of enormous dimensions, far exceeding what human passage would require. More importantly, running along the length of these tunnels were not walkways, but pairs of parallel steel rails firmly installed on the ice floor. This is unmistakable evidence of a railway transport system, something without precedent in any prior polar construction. The presence of rails confirms that the primary function of this underground space was transportation, and that the cargo involved possessed mass and scale impossible to handle through human labor or conventional tracked vehicles, in a secluded zone excavated deeper and wider than the other branches. Military engineers established a special experimental rail line. Here, custom locomotives and rail cars moved back and forth continuously through a strict and repetitive sequence of acceleration, deceleration, emergency stops, and reversals. The purpose of this activity was not to deliver supplies from storage to kitchens. It was to test the stability of the ice foundation under high-intensity mechanical vibrations. A climate research station has no need to test dynamic load tolerance of rail systems, but a transit hub for heavy military hardware must. Field data indicate that Camp Century functioned as a central hub, the starting point for a far more ambitious plan to extend these rail branches across the interior of Greenland. The code name for the project hidden behind this rail system was Iceworm, The name evokes the image of a burrowing creature tunneling through the earth, perfectly reflecting the operational logic of the system. Military planners envisioned a colossal underground transport network stretching thousands of kilometers, connecting hundreds of nodes beneath the perpetual ice. Within this model, Camp Century was merely a proof of concept for a nightmarish transportation system in which trains could move in secrecy without ever surfacing. Constructing such a complex railway network in the most hostile environment on Earth demanded economic and technical resources that no civilian scientific project could ever justify. The existence of this underground rail network leads to an unavoidable logical consequence regarding the nature of the cargo it was meant to carry. In military doctrine, armored railways and reinforced tunnel systems are built only when there is a need to protect and relocate assets of extreme strategic value, assets that are also prime targets for enemy attack. The dimensions and load capacities of the tunnels and rails at Camp Century align precisely with those of Cold War-era ballistic weapon systems. This infrastructure was not designed for peaceful research. It was the skeletal framework of a mobile war machine, engineered to remain completely hidden beneath the white cloak of the Arctic, awaiting an order that was never given. A bomb beneath the white snow. Once the piece of the underground rail system is placed in its proper position within the geopolitical picture, the ultimate purpose of Camp Century emerges in a stark and terrifying form. Project Iceworm was not a logistical experiment. It was a cover for positioning a strategic offensive weapon right on the Soviet Union's doorstep, a mobile nuclear launch platform. At the time, nuclear deterrence relied on two main methods: fixed missile silos, which an enemy could locate and destroy, and nuclear submarines, which were harder to detect but extremely expensive and difficult to communicate with. The United States needed a third option, something as invisible as a submarine and as stable and precise as a land-based installation, yet impossible to eliminate in a preemptive strike. Greenland, with ice miles thick, appeared to be the perfect answer to that deadly equation. The practical plan behind Project Iceworm, drafted in detail within classified Pentagon documents, envisioned deploying roughly 600 medium-range ballistic missiles known as Iceman, described as a variant of the well-known Minuteman line. These missiles would never remain in one place. Instead, they would be loaded onto trains moving continuously through a 4,000-kilometer tunnel network beneath the ice, constantly shifting among thousands of predetermined launch points. The tactic had a chilling name: a nuclear shell game. No matter how advanced Soviet reconnaissance satellites became, they would see only a featureless white ice desert. They would never know precisely where the nuclear warheads were at any given moment, making interception and preemptive attack effectively impossible. The scale of this scheme implied a diplomatic deception at the level of a nation-state. Denmark, which held sovereignty over Greenland, maintained a strict policy of a nuclear-free zone, absolutely prohibiting the placement of atomic weapons on its territory. By allowing the United States to build Camp Century, the Danish government believed it was supporting a scientific project and distant defense. It had no idea that its most powerful ally was secretly turning the entire island into a vast missile field, placing indigenous communities and the Danish state itself into the position of a primary target should nuclear war erupt. This breach of trust was not only a violation of sovereignty, it was a reckless gamble with the lives of thousands of innocent people who called the island home. Yet this audacious military ambition ultimately collided with a physical barrier that could not be negotiated: the movement of the Earth itself. Geological data gathered during the construction of Camp Century revealed that the glacier's rate of motion was far faster than military engineers had initially expected. Ice is not concrete; it flows plastically, like cold honey. The constant deformation of the tunnels twisted steel frames, knocked rails out of alignment, and threatened to crush any delicate missile systems that might be installed. By 1963, the Pentagon was forced to accept that maintaining the geometric precision required for missile launch platforms inside a flowing glacier was technically impossible. Project Iceworm was cancelled, not for moral reasons or respect for sovereignty, but simply because it failed as an engineering problem. The United States military chose to withdraw. The PM-2A nuclear reactor was dismantled and removed, valuable for its economic and technological worth. But the story did not end there. Withdrawal only resolved what was visible above the surface. Thousands of tons of remaining material, treated as worthless waste, were not taken away. They were left behind in dark tunnels, hastily sealed under a naive belief that snow would fall forever, burying this dirty military secret permanently inside the ice, isolated from the civilized world. The sovereignty trap. When the final lights at Camp Century went out in 1966 and the last American soldier departed Greenland, something more dangerous than nuclear missiles was left behind, a vast toxic legacy lying silent beneath the ice. In the military mindset of that era, the Arctic was viewed as an endless trash bin, a place where eternal cold would freeze every problem in the most literal sense. For that reason, the United States military did not carry out restoration procedures or environmental cleanup. It simply walked away, leaving behind around 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, large quantities of highly toxic PCB chemicals used in paints and electrical equipment, and roughly 24 million liters of wastewater and reactor cooling water containing low-level radioactivity. This enormous volume of waste was not neatly locked inside safe containers. It soaked into tunnel structures, sat in improvised holding tanks, and mingled with the snow that surrounded the camp, under normal principles of international conduct. When a country withdraws forces from another nation's territory, it has an obligation to return the site in a clean condition, or at the very least, to disclose remaining risks in full. At Camp Century, silence was absolute. There was no detailed handover record of toxic materials, no radiation warning to local Inuit communities, and no comprehensive disclosure to the Danish government. This turned Greenland from a strategic partner into a victim forced to carry the environmental consequences of a conflict it had never joined. Beyond physical contamination, the waste formed a more subtle mechanism, a sovereignty trap. By leaving behind nuclear and chemical refuse, the United States, intentionally or not, created a lasting constraint on the land. Denmark and Greenland did not possess nuclear technology, nor did they have the financial, technical, or logistical capacity to address an environmental hazard buried tens of meters beneath ice under extreme conditions. Any future attempt to monitor, contain, or remove the contamination would therefore depend on American support, American data, and American technology. As long as the toxins remain in place, the United States retains a lever of intervention in Greenland's affairs under the banner of technical responsibility, weakening the ability of local communities to exercise full self-determination over their ancestral land. Greenlandic leaders, including former Prime Minister Aleqa Hammond, have described this as a blatant violation of human rights. Their position is straightforward. The Americans arrived, exploited the geography, conducted dangerous experiments, and when the project failed, they turned someone else's home into a dumping ground. That anger has only deepened as demands for transparency have repeatedly met denial or evasions framed as national security. The toxic legacy of Camp Century is not merely a problem of the past. It is an open wound in diplomacy, a reminder that great powers can be willing to sacrifice the safety of smaller nations in service of their own calculations of power. When the ice melts, the past awakens in traditional climate models. Polar ice caps have long been treated as the Earth's eternal deep freeze. Under stable climate conditions, snowfall accumulates over millennia, compressing into dense ice and burying everything within it ever deeper. This physical process created an absolute sense of security for United States military planners in the 1960s. They believed that Camp Century and its vast inventory of toxic waste would be sealed forever beneath hundreds of meters of ice, completely isolated from the living world. However, rising global temperatures over the past half-century have triggered an abnormal melt process that has shattered this natural safeguard and turned a protective shell into an immediate threat. The transformation begins at the surface, but reaches deep below. Instead of simply accumulating, Greenland's surface ice now melts at unprecedented rates during summer months. Meltwater does not only flow outward to the sea, it also seeps downward through cracks and microscopic voids, forming subsurface water reservoirs within the glacier itself. This water carries heat from the surface, gradually warming ice layers that were once meant to remain frozen forever. According to a landmark study published in 2016 by climate scientist William Colgan and an international research team, the melt process is advancing far faster than any previous projections. Mathematical models indicate that, within a few decades, melt rates will exceed snowfall accumulation, eroding the protective cover above Camp Century entirely. To verify conditions on the ground, an international expedition that included glaciologist Horst Mackguth returned to the site in 2017. From the air, the region appeared as an endless white desert, with no visible trace of an underground city. Yet, when ice-penetrating radar instruments were dragged across the surface, the screens revealed a grim picture of what lay beneath. The once celebrated underground complex had been crushed by the pressure of millions of tons of ice, flattened into a thin and compact layer that scientists described as pancake flat. The most alarming discovery, however, was not the collapse of steel structures, but the presence of liquid contamination reservoirs trapped within the debris. The abandoned waste includes an estimated 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, large volumes of radioactive wastewater, and most critically, polychlorinated biphenyls, highly toxic chemical compounds widely used in insulation paints and electrical equipment during the 1960s. While frozen, these substances remain largely immobile as melting progresses. However, infiltrating water dissolves the toxins and creates a hidden stream of contamination. This flow does not remain in place. Driven by gravity, it moves toward the coastline, where rich marine ecosystems exist near Thule. There, PCBs can enter the food chain, accumulating in the fatty tissues of fish and seals and ultimately reaching human populations. This is an irreversible biological transmission process that directly threatens food security and the health of indigenous Inuit communities. The response to this danger has been an unsettling silence from authorities. Aleqa Hammond, former Prime Minister of Greenland, repeatedly demanded transparency from Copenhagen and Washington regarding the true extent of contamination. The answers she received were vague or denied outright on grounds of security. Scientists involved in the expedition were also bound by non-disclosure agreements that prohibited direct drilling into waste zones to collect samples and verify radiation levels. They were limited to indirect measurements and warnings based on simulation models. The contradiction between accelerating ice melt and sluggish diplomatic response has created a dangerous bottleneck. Camp Century is no longer a sleeping relic. It is awakening in a literal physical sense. As the ice thins year by year, the distance between the modern world and the toxic mistakes of the Cold War continues to shrink. The question is no longer whether contamination will escape, but when the first polluted waters will reach the ocean. When that moment arrives, no existing legal or technical barrier will be capable of stopping it. The eternal curse in international law. Territorial sovereignty is usually defined by treaties, borders, and administrative presence. Under this conventional framework, Greenland belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark and is moving toward expanded self-governance. The United States military is officially a temporary tenant at Thule under the 1951 Defense Agreement. Yet the physical reality beneath the ice at Camp Century tells a very different story about power. By leaving behind an immense mass of immovable nuclear and chemical waste, the United States established a new and more enduring form of control than any military garrison: environmental occupation. The mechanism of this occupation rests on responsibility and technological dependence. Managing nuclear waste and toxic chemicals in Arctic conditions requires enormous financial resources and specialized technology that neither Greenland nor Denmark possesses. If Denmark attempted cleanup alone, it would face costs measured in billions of dollars and the risk of radiation release during excavation, a scenario of political self-destruction. If it does nothing, it must accept the permanent presence of American expertise, oversight, and intervention to monitor and manage the risk, as long as the waste remains. Washington retains an effective veto over planning and development decisions in the region. History adds a bitter irony. In 1946, the United States offered to buy Greenland for $100 million in pure gold and was refused. 7 decades later, reality suggests that no purchase was necessary. Control over the island's strategic core was achieved through waste, the legacy of Project Iceworm. Though a technical failure in missile deployment succeeded in creating a powerful geopolitical anchor, the buried contamination acts like a permanent mortgage document, holding the land hostage to a Cold War legacy that never truly ended. It is a textbook example of ecological debt used as an instrument of influence, where the polluter becomes the authority because only it understands and can theoretically resolve the damage it created. Declassified documents and ongoing evasive behavior by involved parties only reinforce this conclusion. The 1951 agreement contained no provisions addressing environmental responsibility after military withdrawal, creating a vast legal gray zone that the United States has fully exploited. Denmark, caught in the middle, cannot exert excessive pressure on its most important NATO ally, nor can it adequately answer Greenlanders demanding independence. This paralysis is the clearest evidence that Greenland's sovereignty has been deeply compromised, not by weapons, but by rusting chemical barrels hidden in the dark. Ultimately, the answer to the question of who truly controls Greenland does not lie in parliamentary buildings in Nuuk or Copenhagen. It lies 30 meters beneath melting ice. Camp Century, once a disguised scientific project, has become a monument to the cruelty of geopolitical calculation. It proves that in the games of great powers, land is not occupied only by armies. It can also be occupied by destruction. Ice may melt, but the invisible chains forged from nuclear waste will bind this land for centuries to come, turning Greenland into a permanent casualty of a war the world believed it had left behind.